Hare Krishna, dear devotees. I'm honored to be requested to say a few words in memory of His Holiness Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj on the occasion of his Disappearance Day. Gosh, Tamal Krishna Maharaj was such a wonderful devotee. And for myself and for many others, he was like a very wonderful and very caring elder brother. He was a wise guide. He was a dear friend. And he was always a source of inspiration for myself, and I'm sure for many others. I never really was in the preaching field with His Holiness Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj. But I did have his association over the years in Vrindavan. We met during the period when Maharaj was serving as Srila Prabhupada's personal secretary during Prabhupada's final pastimes in Vrindavan. There I had the opportunity to observe his great devotion to Srila Prabhupada. I observed over those months how, as Srila Prabhupada's health was continually dwindling, that Tamal Krishna Maharaj would not spare any pain to try to facilitate any desire that Srila Prabhupada had. And I think that was probably a characteristic of his greater devotional life also, that that he would spare no pain in the service of Srila Prabhupada. After Srila Prabhupada passed away, our paths crossed not so frequently. But then in the late 80s and early 90s, we were together many times in Vrindavan. You all know that he had his beautiful home on the corner of the Parikram Marg. And at that time I was serving in Vrindavan with Food for Life, and I would cook for the devotees, and oftentimes I would go and visit Tamal Krishna Maharaj. Many times when I would go to visit, I would, quietly go into his courtyard, and I would go just outside, the window of his room, because it had wooden shutters. And many times I would, announce my, presence by very creepily howling like a dog outside of his window. And that would just automatically lighten the mood, and he would invite me in. Once during a very, very cold but very, brilliantly sunny winter day in Vrindavan, I went to visit Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and we were pacing back and forth in his small garden, and we were chanting japa. And I asked him, I said, could you share with me some of your most fond memories of your moments with Srila Prabhupada? And much to my surprise, both of the instances that he shared with me are when Srila Prabhupada, in Prabhupada's very special way, really, how to say, he took Tamal Krishna Maharaj and really put him in his place. You know, he told me one story about Juhu, when the property was being purchased and there was some mistake, and Srila Prabhupada would publicly humiliate Tamal Krishna Maharaj in front of all the Indian gentlemen. And another time in Los Angeles. But it was very wonderful to see that although he was such a great personality, that he relished, this, being corrected and being chastised and being fully loved by Srila Prabhupada. I think a lot of people saw His Holiness Tamal Krishna Maharaj as being a very strict and sort of fearsome person. But I always saw him as a person who was just full of love. And he was a person who always wanted to have someone that he could share his love with and somebody that he could serve with. I can recall one night, maybe it was the winter in Vrindavan in 1988 or 89, I'm not really sure, I think 1988. I was staying in room 105 in the Gurukula. And at about 1 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody was beating at my door and they were calling my name. And I jumped up to see who it was, and it was Tamal Krishna Maharaj's servant. And, he looked at me and he said, Goswami Maharaj wants you to come immediately. So I was nervous. I was thinking maybe he's ill, or I didn't know what the situation was. So I just wrapped up in something warm. And I went over to his house. And when I got to his house, he was there along with Danadhar Maharaj. And he was in a very tense mood. And he was pacing from one end to his room to the other. And he said, I need somebody who will preach with me in China. I need somebody to go and preach with me in China. So I looked at Danadhar Maharaj, and Danadhar Maharaj looked at me, and I realized that, Maharaj is in a very intense mood. And then he looked up and he said, I had like a horrible dream. I had a very horrible dream. He said, I dreamt I was a taxi driver in China. And I was driving a taxi, and these people got in the back of the taxi, and they started doing all these horrible things. Do you want to know what they were doing? And Danadhar Swami and I looked up and we said, no, we don't want to know. And then he said, I need somebody to go and preach with me. I need somebody to go and preach with me. And at that time I started feeling nervous because he was looking at me. And he said, I always wanted some pious association. He said, I always wanted pious association. And then he said, I wanted Jayapataka Swami's association. He's such a pious man, but I couldn't get his association. I wanted Shivaram Swami's association. He's such a pious man, but I couldn't get his association. And then he looked at me and he said, would you go to China with me? When he said that, I went, and I swallowed deeply, because I'd not thought about that ever. And I'd never thought about, the prospect of working hand in hand with Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And I swallowed, and then I thought, and I said, but Maharaj, I'm not pious like Jayapataka Swami Maharaj or Shivaram Swami Maharaj. And he looked at me in his typical New York accent, and he said, yeah, I know you're not pious, but still I'd like for you to go to China. He took pleasure in a description that Prabhupada gave of him. that he was a desperate man, meaning that if Prabhupada gave him an absolutely impossible engagement, something that no one else could do, then by hook or by crook, Tamal Krishna Maharaj would be desperate to get that service done. And he took a lot of, I think he took a lot of pride and honor in the fact that Prabhupada noted that characteristic of his service attitude. His Holiness Giridhar Swami was speaking about the kirtans in Mayapur during those final visits of Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And those visits were very wonderful. Maharaj was just absolutely open. Maharaj was absolutely welcoming to everyone. It seemed that if Maharaj had ever had any tensions with anyone or anything, those tensions were finished, and his heart was just overflowing with love and grace. We used to participate in the kirtans in the evening, and then every day Maharaj would have a really wonderful lunch, and he would invite us to come for lunch. And I remember just maybe one day or 2 days before Maharaj passed away, and after lunch everybody had left, and Maharaj and I were basically relaxing together in his room, and he was sitting on the floor and he was leaning against the wall, and he had his bundi untied, and he said, "Did I ever show you Prabhupada's tooth?" And I said, "No." And he had a gold kavacha that he wore, and he took the kavacha and he picked it up and he opened it, and it had Srila Prabhupada's tooth inside, and he showed it to me. And he closed it, and then he put it back on his chest, and he smiled. And in a very sort of, I can't say prophetic, but it was prophetic. He looked up and he said, "You know why I wear this?" And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because one day, when I go to Samadhi," he said, "I want to have this on my neck. So if people come and if they bow down, they will be bowing down to something worthwhile." And then just a few days later, he left this world. So for me, it was a privilege, and it was an honor to have Maharaj's association. And it was a privilege and it was an honor to be able to render any service that I could at that time to Maharaj. Every time I drive to Mayapur, along that road, I think of Maharaj, and I feel a sense of lamentation that that Maharaj is no longer here, to assist in guiding myself and helping to give guidance to the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. But I pray that Tamal Krishna Maharaj is guiding us from above, and I'm sure that in the hearts of all of his sincere friends and all of his sincere disciples, he's guiding them, engaging them, and encouraging them in the spirit of pure devotional service to Krishna. So thank you very much, and Tamal Krishna Goswami Maharaj ki jai.